So I wanted to bring Margaret along because we go way back in some sense. We met in Wrangell, Alaska, in Alaska Crossings, as two field guides that wanted a job to work in the outdoors in Alaska. And Margaret ended up meeting her partner, her husband, Josh, who is who was my roommate at the time, and he gave me a lot of shit because he's a Penguins fan and I'm a Capitals fan, and the Capitals couldn't beat the Penguins, and it was horrible and depressing. But we had this. We ended up getting an apartment. It was a bunch of us field guides. Margaret actually lived in another house. But we got this apartment, and we historically threw what I still think to this day is the best party in Wrangell history, where Chris Reuter and we dug up the baseball diamond and collected all the sand, and we covered our linoleum floor apartment, which had no furniture and sand, and we threw a beach party in the dead of winter in Alaska. Do you remember that party, Margaret?
I do, yes. And I was always so curious about what your electric bill was after that, because you guys pumped the heat up so high.
Yeah, it ended up being too hot. We had to open the windows.
Yeah.
I just remember the manager of the apartment knocking on the door saying, "What's going on here?" And me thinking, "Oh my gosh, we've trashed this place." And then him coming in and saying, "As long as it's clean by lunch tomorrow, I don't care." So it was really good. But one of the things I wanted to bring Margaret on is because you've gone from field guiding in the United States context to now this role of, how would you describe your role in the field of wilderness therapy?
Yeah, so I'm currently the director of operations at one of the wilderness therapy organizations. I also serve on the Outdoor Behavioral Health Council, and I'm the chair of the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee on that council. And then I am also a volunteer on the AEE Accreditation Council. And I started my first term there in May. And I am, you mentioned my husband, and he definitely went like the therapeutic route out of field guiding. And I have just, I've just always, my affinity has been way more on the logistics, operational side of things. And so that's been the way I've gone on my professional path. And now as the director of operations at my organization, I get to focus a lot on staffing, training, how we structure our systems to support good risk management in the field. Also, some of the business side of our risk management, working with our admissions team, our marketing team, and just supporting that lens throughout the whole organization, and working a lot on culture and sort of making sure that we have a culture that can support our systems and really thriving.
And part of that in the logistics is not only logistics of planning, extended stay expeditions, but also in sort of risk management and incident management. And I'm wondering, where did your sort of, I don't know if it's a passion, because a lot of people don't like talking about risk management because it feels like a administrative task instead of a tool to help us improve our work. So where did that come from?
That's a good question. It actually has nothing to do with my professional experience. So my brother, he has severe developmental disabilities. And when he turned 18, I actually became his guardian for a number of reasons. My parents are both healthy and well and alive, but I took guardianship over. And so I grew up with him. I was a sibling of disabilities, and orienting to the world with him was always really challenging. And I could get into COVID and like how that impacted the disabled community, which was significant, as it was in many communities in many different ways. But growing up with him, I just always had this lens of thinking about situations we were in differently and making sure that it was a space that he was going to go into and feel safe and feel supported. And also if there were factors that like I had to pay attention to, and this is so silly, but things like going to the movies with him, and if there were going to be triggers in a movie, and like how I was going to help him through that, and if we needed to leave, like how are we going to do the least amount of disruption and get out of this movie theater. So stuff like that. And when I initially got out of school, I thought I was going to work with the disabled community, but it actually felt way too close to home. And that's when I found wilderness and working with the at-risk population. And those worlds just came together for me in such a special way that I felt like I could utilize sort of that different way of thinking, like somebody with disabilities and having a sibling with cognitive disabilities, like it's almost like growing up with in a second language home. And so that's how I've always like thought my brain worked, is like I almost can speak a second language, not really. I wish I could. And so anyway, that's really where I think that I feel like it's so important to be thinking of all the things to support whatever you're doing in a way that it's going to actually execute in the way you want it to. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's always interesting how our personal experience turn into our work as well, and we bring our passions into that. And
Yeah.
so one of the things when it comes to risk, and I want you to get on your high horse about this, is we think about incident reports. And quite often we think, I better do this incident report just to cover my ass because I'm going to get in trouble because something bad happened. And then we only save the incident reports for things that really go wrong, not for the little things that also go wrong. And so could you say something about near misses, and maybe explain what a near miss is, and then sort of why they're important to know about and to acknowledge?
Yeah, I knew you were going to ask me about near misses, and I almost wrote some thoughts down. Like you spoke about incident reports and then near misses, so let me orient myself. Yeah, I think it's important to, it's like the thing that could have gone wrong that didn't, and so it's an opportunity to learn. And if something happens that either you miss part of a protocol, or even it occurs to you like, oh wow, something almost happened and it didn't, and there should have been something in place, and this didn't happen just by luck. And so by documenting something like that, you can you can learn, and you can help not just your guide team or your group of peers in that moment learn from that, but you can also help whatever organization you're working with learn from something that didn't actually happen, and prevent it, and put the right mitigation factors in place to prevent it from happening in the future, either to yourself or to another group that's working within your organization.
Mm. And so so there's near misses, which are things that happened, that maybe we missed something that we were supposed to do. And then how can someone who's working outdoors have an eye for catching these near misses? Because in the busy day to day of being outdoors, and even some people here working in a community-based setting might work with multiple different people doing different adventures throughout a day, and in the busyness of that might miss these things. How do you train your team to have an eye for these things and not be scared to acknowledge them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that last piece you said, not be scared to acknowledge it, is that's such a culture piece. You have to set up way before even having people in the field. Like that has to permeate through your entire organization, because you have to make sure that the purpose of reporting things, whether it's an actual incident or a near miss, is to learn and to grow. Not just for, again, that individual, but for the whole organization. And so I think there's a lot you can do to sort of set up that culture and that precedence. And I know, like, I walked into the current organization I'm in, and I think that they've got a lot of growing and learning. They're a relatively small organization. And I think a big reason a lot of people thought that they did incident reports was because it was a state licensure requirement, and that's it. And so people were only thinking of it like, oh, is this a state licensure thing? Okay, like I guess I'll report that, and like I'll look at the state regs, not like, oh, this is something that could have happened. Like somebody could have been hurt, we could have missed something, somebody could have gotten lost, whatever it might have been, and they weren't really thinking of it through that lens. And I know that for myself, when I was actually at Alaska Crossings, we were doing, I think it was a mile-long ocean crossing, and we had to call in to our office prior to doing those crossings, and
Mhm.
the manager on call at the time, she said, "Did you check all your kids and make sure that they have wetsuits on?" And I said, "Oh no, we didn't." And she said, "Okay, go do that and call me back." And we did, and one kid didn't have theirs on. And I was like,
Mm.
"Oh my gosh." Like, and so we took the time, got the kid. We literally had to undo an entire canoe, undo the spray deck, take the bags out, retie everything down. It was quite a process. And then so the kid got his dry or wetsuit on, and then I called back and said, "We're ready to do the crossing." One kid didn't, and she had us do a near miss report. And it was interesting because in my head at first I was like, okay, I did the call in and the manager was helping me go through our checklist and she helped me catch it. That's the process. So was it a near miss? And it just took me a while to kind of come back around. Like, why did I need to fill that out? And like, and I thought about it a lot. And bottom line is, like, we could have missed the sat phone window. We could have not had a good connection. She might have misheard me, like, during that part of the report. There were a lot of things that, and she really should be the last line of defense. And it just helped me understand, yeah, like, if we had been in the middle of a mile-long crossing, this kiddo was 14, he was pretty skinny, it was, I think, March, and it would have been
Mm.
really chilly, and a lot of things
Hmm.
could have happened. And even though we did the crossing and all our kids had wetsuits on, like, that was important for me to learn from that. And it was also important because in the narrative of the incident report, I wrote out, like, how did the morning look, like, why did we potentially miss that, like, we were busy. And so when that got to the manager, she got to read through that and help, like, how do I train staff to make sure they're managing their morning well before you're getting to tying boats down, to prevent even that
Mm.
untie and redo of that whole process. So it was an important experience for me to have, like, in the moment of having that manager hold me accountable, um, but also to understand, like, what the purpose of a near miss is. And again, like that, I think she talked me through that too when we were done with that trip. And that was an important thing that I think she did as a manager and that I do now, is talk about, why did I have you write this incident report? Why did I have you think about the process that led up to the near miss or the incident? Because those are the pieces that are really the meat of the learning. It's not the actual incident. It's like, what are all the other factors at
Yeah.
play that might get missed from when I hear, like, oh, we did a crossing without a wetsuit? Like, that's just like one little snippet of time, and you need to know about all the bits beforehand to really understand how to prevent that in the future.
That's a great example, and you kind of said this, that a crossing at that particular program is any time we're more than half a mile from land. So think that's
Yeah.
quite a distance. So that means if that canoe tips over, you're half a mile from getting that kid out of the wind, out of the water, next to a fire, warming up. And so it's a long way in Alaskan water, which is rough, can be rough water. Um, so yeah, I think that's a really good example. And there's so many important professional links to add to this, that when things go wrong on an airplane, even if the airplane doesn't, you know, even if it doesn't crash, there's a full investigation into what happened here. And so there's a lot of links to why we have to be told every time where the life jacket is, and why we have to go, which exit row is closest to me. It's not because we're more likely to be hurt by it, but that's gone wrong before, and then a new policy is in place to fix it. And you brought up checklists, and my favorite book is not in my bookshelf, which means I lent it to somebody, is the Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande, who is my favorite science writer. But he talks about checklists in improving the safety of surgery. And it's all things, the checklist contains all things surgeons say they do really well. Did you count how many instruments you used before the surgery? And did you count them at the end to make sure there's no scalpel in someone's stomach? Did you mark the site of what leg you're going to amputate so you don't do the wrong one? And these are good surgeons who are very skilled. And this is one of the things with facilitation. Our jobs are complicated when we're outside. We're thinking about weather, people's well-being, and then we're also pretending to be therapists at the same time, having useful conversations. Now, it's easy to miss things. It's easy to miss does everyone have this gear on? And we can always think, not us. So it's not the sign of a bad facilitator when shit hits the fan. It's more that, did we miss something that's one of those really basic things? And I was wondering, could you say a bit about that? Because you have a story about a flight and with a baby and a life jacket as well.
Oh, right. I have 2 children, and we got on a flight with too many in-lap children, and it was a fully domestic flight. So it was flying from Minnesota to Colorado. And we had to get off the flight because there were too many in-lap children and there were not enough infant life vests. It was just so funny because I was thinking to myself, like, I get it. And I bet other people would be really upset about having to get off this flight. And I'd much rather be on a flight where people are doing that, where the flight attendants and the flight crew are doing their checklist than not. And it makes me feel safer on that airline that they're really following it to a T, even though the likelihood of us landing in water was exceptionally low. Yeah.
They're still following.
Yeah. No, and I mean, like, the checklist thing I think is so important, but it's also like really I think for me it goes beyond like checklists. It goes beyond like practicing and doing the dance yourself in rehearsal before you're putting yourself in a position to be responsible for other individuals in the outdoors, which is why like staff training is so important, which is why like putting either yourself or the staff in the like sort of the field before they have participants, clients, whoever, looking at them to be the one that has to respond to something, because it gives that individual the opportunity to learn their own kinks. Like, what are the systems they need to refine? How do they have their bag packed? Does it support them in responding quickly to an incident, to get to their first aid kit? Whatever it might be, like doing that rehearsal and pushing yourself to like, I think it was Steve Prozunka who said, like, get yourself to know that you can operate at like 100%, and then only ever put yourself in the position that you're operating at like 50% with clients or participants, whoever you're working with, so that you always know that you have that extra percentage of skill or energy or whatever it is to go. But you always have to know what your limits are, and then to never put yourself in that position. And just being really mindful of what your limits are, so that when you're also responsible for someone else, you can take care of yourself and take care of that individual. I feel like that was such an important thing about any training that I've been a part of and any training that I've facilitated, is making sure that you really permeate that, like, be prepared, know your own systems, know how to take care of yourself first. And it's that woofer thing, like, I'm number one. Because you are, and you also have to, outside of like the physical pieces of that, know that you can regulate yourself emotionally as well, and be prepared to do those internal checks, especially working in the mental health side of the outdoor industry. I think that's a big piece of what we talk about, like, know your own levels of resilience, know your own coping skills, and know like when to say help, and like how to navigate not just the logistical pieces of that, but also the emotional impacts, because that can be real as well.
And I think that's a really good point about how you experience yourself, the different adventures you do. And I often use scuba diving as an example. I learned to scuba dive for my 30th birthday in the Maldives. It was freaking beautiful. There was manta rays and sharks, and it was an unbelievable experience. I'm an anxious scuba diver, and I ruined everyone's time, because who loses all their oxygen first? The anxious scuba diver. So I'm underwater, weightless, right? No physical exertion in scuba diving, and I'm breathing like this. I'm like, where is the tiger shark that's about to eat me gonna come from? I was so nervous. So they'd be like, we're going down for 30-minute dive here. We'd be back in 20 minutes because me and my brother were too anxious to scuba diving. And my stepson, little Lucas, he still had another 20 minutes in his tank, but you all go up together. So I would not be a good adventure therapy scuba diver facilitator. I'm also not very good with people on ledges. I just get nervous about, oh my gosh, I got to check this knot 35 times. So I need a competent climbing person to work with me. And I've learned that about myself, that if I set it up, if I do all the anchors and someone double checks my work, I have to double check someone else's. It just works better for me. I need that level of competence, so I don't have to worry about those things, and I can facilitate like I'm happy belaying somebody, not a problem, but I get anxious about those other things. And being on the water, not anxious at all. And being in whitewater with a canoe, no problem. It's just those weird things, and knowing how we experience those different adventures is really important. You brought up the
Yeah.
importance of organizational culture when it comes to feeling safe to go to your supervisor or your boss and saying, hey, this went wrong, and I think we can talk about it. How have you worked to do that with your new organization?
Yeah, it's interesting. We actually just started running a different, I wouldn't say a different type of field staff training, but we sort of like reworked the logistics, not the content of it. And we had our first run through, I guess it was a month or so ago, and something got missed in the training that was not actually a part of the content, but it was a part of actually hiring the individuals. And at the end of the training, that was the thing that everyone focused on. And it was kind of talked about initially, or at least my experience of it was that it was a failure because we missed that thing. And it took a lot, and we hadn't even set up, we're getting into the debrief culture still of making sure we talk about new things or different things or even incidents and debriefing them. And so we put together a debrief of the individuals responsible for setting up training, hiring, all the things. And we talked about it, and I said, you guys, like, we have to think about this as a success either way. Like, we missed something, and this was the first time we've done this, and it's an opportunity to learn. And either way, we still have this many individuals that are coming on board and getting hired, although it was a few days delay in the actual sort of like official hiring. And it took a lot for the team of managers to come around to seeing it as a success, even though like one thing went wrong. That was the thing they were focused on. And this could be a really long spiel I give, but essentially, the team culture right now is people are kind of siloed and they're not used to like working together, and supporting each other. I think people see themselves like, this is my job, you do your job. And so it's working like when we debrief things, it's working on like, okay, what in your role can you take responsibility for, even if it doesn't have anything to do with this one piece of the pie? Like, reflect on your piece. Like, could you have mentioned like, what about this to the other individual? And really just like orienting them to that like culture of support. And I don't know if that makes sense, but like helping them just like rework their thinking of how we do these things, because it's not just like the recruiter, it's not just the actual trainer, it's not just the HR person. Like, we all have to work together to make this thing go off without a hitch. And bottom line, like, something might not ever go off without a hitch. Somebody might forget a water bottle, and we could all focus on that as the failure. But like turning it around and saying, yes, like, we had a miss and we're going to learn from it, and we're not going to do that thing next time. And again, going back to the successes of it. So they're really not looking, they're just sort of ingrained in that pattern of being siloed and focusing on the thing that went wrong. And so I think that's been a really helpful thing. And honestly, it's a big part is the debrief process. And it's just being repetitive with how we're talking about things and reminding them that like we have successes to reflect on, and not allowing people to go off with their own story. And it's the therapeutic thing. What is it like? This thing can be traumatic, or like this thing causes trauma versus this thing can cause trauma. It's like, and it's all about how you process it and integrating it into your experience. And it's silly to think of something therapeutic in terms of an organizational culture piece, but that's really important. You have to do the debrief.
Yeah, I don't think it's a weird thing at all, because I've been working on this project asking adventure therapy people to do some outcome monitoring. And one person emailed me and they said, I'm starting to realize I'm not as perfect of a therapist as I thought. Like, can we talk about this? And all I wanted to say is fantastic. Now you can get better. Like, now we can get to work on, and I think it's so important. And another person had emailed me and said, my client actually gave me some really rough feedback. And I went, cool. Now you know. Wouldn't you rather them tell you than going home to their partner and being like, Dr. Dobut is a real idiot? I'd rather
Yeah.
know that so I can try to be less of an idiot.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that like it's a level of like humility, and but like it's not even when it comes to like professional growth, saying that you aren't perfect or saying that you have growth areas isn't being humble. It's just being aware like of what you need to do. It's just being professional about how to move forward. Like we're all going to have growth areas, and I know that especially in the guiding industry, like you start and you're like, oh my God, I'm a failure. I can't do anything. I can't believe they hired me. And then you like go to like, I'm the freaking best. Like I know
Yeah.
everything and I could train everyone. Like I'm God's gift to guiding. And then you like go up and down and then until you finally get to this place of being like, yeah, I'm really skilled in some areas and I have a lot of growth areas. And here's what I do to continue to work on those growth areas. And here's how to keep myself sharp in those areas I'm skilled in. And it's just sort of like finding the equilibrium between those two things. And I don't know if maturity is the right word for that, but I just think you like when someone can come and take ownership and responsibility over an incident in a professional way that's not self-deprecating or it's not like crushing, because when somebody takes like things really hard, that's also culturally damaging. If somebody isn't able to process through a mistake, it can be really hard to have an incident that you feel like was your fault essentially. And there's professional ways to work through that and to know like what you could have done differently and how you can prevent it. And it's important to be able to recognize that stuff as well.
Totally. And I'm going to pass over to Nevin. He's got his hand up. And for context for Margaret, as we were sort of at Alaska Crossings at the end of Przunka's reign of the program, you've got a long history with, but even before Crossings. So Nevin on Vancouver Island goes way back with Przunka. So
cool.
Can you add a bit of context to that, Nevin, for 30 seconds?
Well, I'd rather just fall into telling stories about Steve that would embarrass him, but conversations. I was just thinking about some of the content you guys are talking about, and I really appreciate hearing, Margaret, your experiences coming from different organizations. And I have a sense of what you learned or what you experienced, both you and Will, at a program like Alaska Crossings, which is actually like big adventure, like real high risk, mountaineering, whitewater paddling, ocean canoeing in northern cold waters. And so I understand also the protocols and processes that would be built into a system like that, so that even newer-ish, less experienced maybe staff can work in a model like that, where there's a lot of process, there's probably a lot of protocol. I can completely see the training program he's put in place. I know most of the people that train people in the beginning and through the years. So my question is this: what you've learned from programs like that, and in your bio, there's these other, say, OBH or wilderness therapy programs. If you're at a place now where you're describing a culture that is open to debriefing, open to feedback, to Will's point about assessment and evaluation, how do you, or what I don't know exactly what my question is going to be yet. What do you see as the key elements of creating that culture organizationally that has that openness and that acceptance of, if we look at it, if we talk about it, if we ask questions, we will get better? Because that's not always the case. There's a lot of organizations that just run on models, and they, using the mechanical process, they process people through the model, right? And not a lot of learning happens. So what would you say in your experience with these different programs, what have been the bigger key elements or essences that have said, like, this is how we get a culture to move forward that is open to that change?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think that the thing It's interesting because I've seen it play out in so many different ways, like high accountability, responsibility, high focus on like relationship and protecting employees, high focus on protecting experience. There's like so many different ways to orient yourself to that. And when I say experience of the client. And you kind of have to look at it through a lens of everyone's experience, because if you're not supporting your employees, the employees can't support your clients in the field. So you have to really focus on that as well. And so I think, at least right now in my evolution of orienting myself to culture, I think that there is a really good balance needed between ownership, responsibility, boundaries, and accountability, and relationship. It has to be those two things. You have to feel connected to the organization and the mission. You have to feel connected to the people that are running it and feel safe essentially with the way, and trust with the way that it's going to be ran. And that shows up in the ways people present, like personally, interpersonally, but it also shows up in the way like procedures and protocols are followed through in. It's in every bit of the way the organization is ran, that can sort of embed that level of trust and relationship. But then also there has to be a culture of holding people accountable to their roles and their responsibilities. And that has to be demonstrated through role modeling as well. They have to know that exists culturally throughout the organization for them to be able to know it's safe for them to do that, the employees, that is. And so that way it sets up supervisors to hold their staff accountable in doing their job. So if something goes wrong, or if something's not getting done, you can say, let's talk about this, and what is our plan to improve on this or prevent this thing from happening in the future, and doing a really good job at understanding like the experience of the employee. So if they're, I don't know, I can't make up, like, I wish I could make up a thing. Like if they're not, I could give a good example right now. There's a field staff who has not done a good job at call-ins. So when they're calling in, they don't have all the information in front of them. They're not being very clear and articulate. They have to kind of hang up, go get more, come back, and they have to go ask questions about what they're actually reporting. And to me, that's not that individual not understanding what needs to happen. That's a training thing. That's how we're setting our head guide up to support that staff to go off and make a call. That's actually clear protocols written for that individual to make the call. But then it's also making sure that that person feels well set up. And then if you've gone through that whole process with them and made sure they understand, made sure they're getting the support from their head guide, and then talking to them, like, what's your experience? Are you missing something? Like, do you need something to be written down differently? Is there something that could happen differently on the other end of the phone? And when you've gone through that process with somebody, it helps them. And then also throughout that, pushing them to take responsibility and reflect on, what is my piece in this? What could I do differently? And not give them all the answers, and allow them to process through that. But it's kind of like that. I think people have a difficult time stepping into feedback. And I mean, at least it's people who are new to guiding and at least wilderness therapy, adventure therapy. And when you can make them comfortable and understand that feedback is compassionate and not something harsh or something to penalize them, it's to help them grow, and it's about them. And again, that comes from role modeling. I think it makes those individuals feel more supported, and then in turn they can support your clients. And I don't know if I answered your question, but that was a lot of words.
No, I also think it does come from the top, that we have good. I mean, Alaska Crossings was the first program I worked at that I was like, oh my gosh, this is actually a kind of big policies and procedures document that we have to learn. Like, what to do in the first 24 hours, what to do in the first 72 hours, how to do a crossing, how to do a call in, how to write case notes. Like, it was thorough. And I had never experienced that. I also think as someone who has run an organization that I was the director of, and as someone who consults with a lot of different agencies here in Australia, there is an aspect. It takes a while to really learn that no one will give a crap about your business as your staff. They care about going out in the field. And the more we I like what you said about there's two sides of having policies and having relationship, that I have to have the staff will be more engaged in the mission if they're able to be themselves. And then that way I can control the policy side of things and the risk side of things. But I also think with feedback, there's something we did, and I stole this from Daryl Chow and Lynette in the previous presentation this morning or afternoon, depending on where you are, or nighttime if you're in Latvia, anywhere, whatever time it is, the one that was 2 hours ago. She brought up Daryl Chow, who's a psychologist in Fremantle and a pretty prolific psychotherapy researcher. And he did this, I took a supervision course with him. And on Friday afternoons, he told us to get our team together. You can buy some beers if you have to, and sit around and talk about all the mistakes you made that week. And he said, otherwise you won't learn them. You won't catch that, I had a bad day and I didn't call that parent back. And that parent was really stressed and anxious. And why did I not do that? What's there to learn from that? Oh, I didn't read my notes before the next therapy session. And I said to the client, how was your basketball game? And he's like, I play baseball. And then you've had a small rupture by saying something, you can repair those things, but the near misses and the little things we do that are off base are really hard to capture. And if we don't capture them in a timely way, we won't collect them. And I think it's really funny that in the therapy context, you can have a session and you'll go, I'll write my notes a few days later. It's okay. How well are we really going to recall how bad that session was, or these sort of things. So I do think that is, it starts at the top at modeling that we all do make mistakes, and that piece of paper on the wall or having a woofer or a wilderness EMT is not going to prevent you from making mistakes, that they do happen because this work is complicated as well. And if anyone else has a question, thank you, Nevin, for that. I'll pass to you, Margaret, in a sec. If anyone else has a question, feel free to put in the chat box or anything. I thought this one was better being informal because we can riff-raff.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. I want to, like, you both kind of named something about like proceduralizing things, and then you're saying like it's difficult if people feel like they can't be themselves. And it's interesting because having been at Alaska Crossings, that is extremely highly proceduralized out of necessity. And Nevin, you said this, like Crossings was set up in a way that somebody essentially from off the streets and only had sort of a therapeutic background could come in and do that job. And granted, their arc of learning was a lot steeper, but they could still do it and thrive and be successful because of the amount that was proceduralized and written out. But it was the things that needed to be, and not the things that would utilize that sort of creative space of guiding and doing adventure therapy work. And it's interesting because coming to the Down South programs, there's sort of this sentiment and resistance to over proceduralizing things or requiring too much to be written down or requiring too many checklists. And I just want to say, I'd much rather have someone do all that work for me, and all I have to do is check a box or read this thing and follow the directions. And that way I can go and have a really fun day on the water, or have a really fun hike, get to camp early and play a game, or do a really fun therapeutic group and utilize my creative space that way. And I think that says a lot about, and I think when you don't experience that, and again, it goes back to like role modeling, and when you don't experience that, you don't actually know like that can exist with that level of proceduralization, or sort of, because it's sort of offloading your brain space in a different way. And when you're having to remember, like, did we pack up the sump and cover that up? Like, did we go through all the leave no trace stuff? When you're having to like utilize your brain space for those things, and not the like, okay, I have to think about this, like this growth piece for this kiddo, and what could I do later, and what sort of ceremony could I offer, or what sort of group could I offer that would, and utilize, and it's just shifting. So it's really about where you want to use your brain. And I'd think that we all want to have fun in the woods, and so doing what you can to just utilize your brain space in the way you want to use it.
Yeah, and I'm going to pass to Kate in a second, who has a point or a question. Also, if you watch, this is also in the checklist manifesto, that if you watch Sully land the plane on the Hudson River, when they lose full engine, the first thing they do is not like, oh my gosh, they pull out a checklist. And that's the whole idea of what Boeing and Airbus have learned, is that pilots will be their best when we take care of the other things. And with total engine failure, the first thing written on that checklist is, don't forget you're flying a plane. And it's like, just land the plane, okay? Like, it's okay. Kate, over to you.
Yeah. Well, you kind of actually went into what I was going to ask anyway. Yeah, which is good. I was just like thinking that balance between the over procedures and then, you know, like if you're doing wilderness therapy, adventure therapy, often people are going to be, you know, experiencing some kind of disadvantage. So they might, not disadvantage, but, you know, something like PTSD, or if there's a disability, or things that'll often pop up in these procedure checklists where they might be discounted from participating in an activity. And I just thought it was kind of interesting that when you were talking about understanding the trigger points for your brother, and I'm guessing you probably would have seen a lot of discrimination in the sense of, you know, being the guardian for your brother, you would have seen how that might appear in some of these settings, and knowing what you know he's capable of and what the points are to push. So I was just interested in you know, how you might have taken some of those lessons from what you've seen in that experience and tried to, I guess, make change and balancing that in that risk management side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I thank you for saying that. It's interesting. I feel like I am a really big proponent of doing things safely and that are appropriate for people with those added challenges. And sometimes things are not appropriate, and you have to have a system to assess that and understand when it's appropriate and when it's not. And then when you do feel like you've appropriately vetted somebody for whatever activity, doing everything you can to make it a good experience. And so something that I worked on at a previous program I was at was really getting outlines and protocols in place to allow individuals with diabetes to come into the program. And because there are plenty of people with type 1, type 2 diabetes who participate in active lives and can do many things, but when you're in a wilderness therapy program, there's all kinds of added sort of complexities. And so making sure that you have all the objective pieces in place to understand when something's going wrong or when you need to step in to support an individual. And that's really the lens that I've tried to make sure we're looking at things through, especially as it pertains to sort of those added complexities. So if somebody wants to not participate in a hike because they don't feel well, making sure that you have offered the staff the resources to assess that appropriately and to understand, like, let's check your blood sugar, what have you eaten, let's look at your food log, and making sure the staff understand what all those protocols need to be, and then giving them also the therapeutic tools to work through that with that individual as well. But yeah, I mean, there's so much you can do to offer really good experiences for people that have those added challenges. You just have to think out of the box. And, you know, I think it's easy to be like, well, what is wilderness therapy? It's like hiking with a backpack on and talking about your feelings. And it's like, sure, that's one version, right? That's one version. So how could we do it differently? And how could we think about it in a way that is a supportive environment for somebody with a medical disability, a cognitive disability, a physical disability, cultural difference, like whatever it might be. Even, you know, I think that the programs I've worked in can do a better job at making sure that programs are safe places for people of different genders or different gender identities. So what protocols can we put in place that offloads that from even being a thought for that individual? Like, what can we do? Because the onus is on us at that point. If we're saying this is an appropriate place for you to come and have therapeutic experience or have an outdoor experience, whatever it might be that you're offering, it's on you to make that an experience that is going to be a good one for that person. And it's possible if it's appropriate.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I can definitely relate to what Margaret is saying, that being changed in that being trained, sorry, in that modality, it was very different when I came to Australia, and I've written about this previously, coming and working in Indigenous populations, and I'd done some volunteering on Native American in a Lakota community, but going on expedition with people from the APY lands, which is next level remote in the dead center of our state. Not understanding their connection to country, not understanding the importance of a welcome, but actually being welcomed. Thanks, Cass. See you later. Not being welcomed. They were talking about spirits that had followed them because they weren't welcomed on this land. And we had like 3 sleepless nights about all these things that we got totally wrong in my practice. But yeah, figuring out those ways to make, because I think this is Kate, you've brought up a good point, and I think Nevin's question also links with this. What we're seeing in psychotherapy outcomes is this over manualization, and because cognitive behavioral therapy is so flippin' popular, and we're all experiencing the cognitive behavioral tsunami that is happening. What is actually happening is we're teaching therapy students the manual. So they're learning the background, the research, and then why they follow this manual. And what we're starting to see is a decline. We're actually seeing a decline in cognitive behavioral outcomes. And the reason they're thinking this is not that psychodynamic is so much better, but psychodynamic focuses way more on the interpersonal, the relational. What am I seeing this client react to? Am I seeing anxiety coming up? Am I observing this stuff? So it's trickier to manualize that. And so the issue with over policing things is, like Margaret said, I think this is such an important takeaway for me. I'm a disorganized person at the best of times. And I don't, if I can get organized with the things I don't think about and I don't care about, I can be my best as a worker working for those clients. And so when we see the over manualizing, what tends to happen is we do get process focused when it comes to the therapy thing. Tuesday is rock climbing day. Everybody must rock climb today. And if they make it to the top, they did better rock climbing than somebody else. And we lose that what we're trying to do is experiential. And that's the word experiential is all about how is the client experiencing the program. And so when we homogenize clients, we're doing something that can quickly, it's a slippery slope to being quite oppressive, fitting everyone into the same model, no matter what. Nevin, back to you.
Yeah, this is, and if I'm taking up too much airtime, then just cut me off. So we've talked about this notion of building a culture where there's safety, whether that's staff feeling like they can speak out if there's something that's unsafe and they can speak back to management. I worked with a risk management researcher, a colleague in Canada here, Jeff Jackson, and we looked at a whole bunch of outdoor adventure organizations. They're all from one parent company. Pretty obvious who they are if you think about that for a minute. And there was a difference between how staff perceived a culture of safety and how management and owners perceived a culture of safety. And so I'm just wondering, in outdoor therapies realm, in that wilderness therapy realm, how do you go about building not just the culture of safety between management and staff, but I always think there's going to be different perceptions there. We found that. How are outdoor therapy programs trying to find out whether or not they're creating a culture of safety for clients? Is there anyone in OBH, like, how are they looking at that? How are your programs looking at that?
Yeah, I mean, I think something I know that at least my program that I'm currently with has been implementing is just a better like client feedback circuit and getting different sort of opportunities for client feedback in different ways. So not just like a written survey, but interviews at different points in the program. Something that we, we're just like reflecting on a lot of the feedback that we've had over the past few years, and what we recently implemented is making sure that somebody from management is going out and meeting with every group like every other week. So every kiddo in the program sees somebody on the management team every other week, and just has an opportunity to go through like certain things that haven't been addressed for them, whether it's a physical need or a therapeutic need. And it's sort of like offering a place for a different voice, and there's just different relationships that come up with field staff you're working with, or even your therapist or whoever it might be. So just offering sort of different ways to have their voice be heard, and then also following through and making sure that we are addressing that feedback if it's appropriate to address or shift. And then making sure that our staff know that. And also, like, I think a big part of something that comes up is like getting really siloed. I know I've said that word too many times, but like, and I think that that can happen organizationally, it can happen departmentally, and it can happen within groups individually. And I think when you don't realize like that your experience matters and your context matters, whether that's the client or the employee or the organization, I think you can lose sight of what your purpose is and what your mission is. And so I think just making sure that you offer people the opportunity to zoom out, if that makes sense, and just like reframe and reorient them to like what the purpose is. So if you're the client in the field, just like really reminding them like this is, and doing that feedback piece of just like, this how you show up at home sometimes, or just making sure that you're offering them the opportunity to like bring that learning forward away from the program. But then also for the field staff, bringing them into the office and bringing them into experiences that they don't have on the day-to-day when they're out in the field guiding, and bringing them into the conversations that impact their work in the field. And then also bringing them into conversations that are happening in the field at large. So bringing learnings back from conferences, bringing feedback that comes back from parents or referral sources, just like orienting them to what we do and how their work impacts that. I think I've kind of gone away from what your original question is.
Well, I also think it's a really good point. One thing to add about this term siloed is we can, and this is stuff that Nevin and I have written about previously that we won't be able to unpack this with 7 minutes to go. But one of the things that, and it would be a downer, so let's not do it. So, but one of the things that can happen is we can get siloed in our practice. So whether we use the word adventure therapy, outdoor therapy, and then we only look at that modality. And we're not, at our university, some of our indigenous scholars have talked about the pedagogy of discomfort. And it sounds like go out of your comfort zone, which is a weird terminology as well. But it's sort of like, have we looked at literature that might be at odds to what we're thinking? Have we learned from other people that are doing different things that might challenge us to be better at what we're doing, or just to challenge our basic assumptions of where we're at? And Rick has brought up Rick and Katoomba in the Blue Mountains, up from Sydney. I guess you're north from Sydney. I don't know. 2-hour train ride from Sydney. That'll be correct. But Rick has brought up dignity of risk. Is that a theory you're aware of, Margaret?
Dignity of risk? I would say I'm like oriented to it, but I don't think I could articulate it in a way that might be helpful.
So this came out of, and I think we've had conversations about this as well in relation to your family context as well. That this idea came from the 70s, and yeah, Nevin has that's a free article Nevin shared in the chat box that you can read about relational dignity as well, with Karina, who's an amazing writer like Nevin. So she, one of the things, dignity of risk, came from the 70s, and it came from a pastor who said, we are institutionalizing all these people in the name of keeping them safe. And what happens when we do that is we end up taking away their right to experience love, to experience crossing the street and going to the store, to shower when they want to do all of these things. And so sometimes in response to things that go wrong, we overcorrect. And instead of fixing the near miss, we fix the big picture problem. And this is something you've done a little bit of work looking into, Margaret, and maybe this is a good place to wrap up, and this will be a downer wrap up, but that most times in the outdoor adventure world, when deaths do occur, there's a series of little things that could have been corrected. And so it's not to never do a river crossing again, which would be the taking away the opportunity to have that experience. It's fixing the little things that popped up. So do you want to say something to that, and then we can close for the day?
Yeah. I think it's like that pendulum swing. And when something happens, you swing to the other end, and then like slowly, hopefully you like just find ways to let that pendulum balance in the middle. And I think it's really, it's sort of like that fine balance of actual learning, and then what's the word for it? Like just like all the other risks that come with a big incident, like a death. And so how do you balance those things while also protecting the experience of all those individuals at play in those incidents? And doing what you can to prevent and protect, it can be a really fine balance. And so obviously it's really easy to swing heavily in the other direction at first, but always making sure you're being really mindful that you're inching back towards the middle. Because I agree, there are certain things that will ebb away at a process, a procedure, a practice, a culture that will ultimately get yourself to an incident. And so doing what you can, because I mean, it's hard not to do the swing to the harsh other direction. But being really mindful of the reasons why you did that and getting yourself back to the culture place that you want to be in. I think that is one of the hardest things to like reflect on big incidents and know like what all the things you could have done differently for sure, and know that there's probably some big things, but looking at all the little things that you have to course correct.
Yeah.
I don't know if that,
It's good enough. It's good enough. I like the theory. I like this idea of dignity of risk, because in essence, we're going outside for people to experience some sort of risk. And whether it's climbing, we use the words like perceived risk, like top rope climbing is actually pretty safe, but it can feel pretty dangerous. But we want people to dive in and experience what it's like for backcountry living, or, you know, making a fire and these sort of things. And we can have a bunch of rules, and then making a fire can be really boring if they have to do it by following all the rules. And so, and I know I probably like this theory because I'm super oppositional anyway. But Margaret, thank you so much. It's always so lovely to connect with you. And I will, I really appreciate it. And I think it's always fantastic to connect. And I think this is a topic we don't often talk about, the adventure side and how to get better at that aspect of our facilitation. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
I hope
Thank you
all
for having me.
it.
Thank you for all the conversation. Yeah, it's really helpful.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, you are all free to leave. Thank you. I'm going to stop recording.